All right, we are live. Giants host the Houston Texans today. This is a battle of two really boring teams, except that the Giants are better at being boring than the Texans. Which is a shame for the Giants because they should be more explosive than they already are. A few things might get better for them as the season goes along, but it's a weird year where the Giants fans are getting sick of hearing that this is like the worst 6-2 team ever. They have a +6 scoring differential. They scored 6 more points than they've had scored against them, and yet I will hand it to them. I think with Brian Daboll, their first-year head coach, it's not just luck. Sometimes when teams have a bunch of one-score victories, it's just luck. I think Brian Daboll has done a good job, kind of like he did with Buffalo, of managing a quarterback who can run and minimizing, what damage he can do. Daniel Jones is certainly not Josh Allen, but he's athletic, and they take advantage of that, and they keep games close. In terms of some of the other things that these two teams do similarly, it's kind of weird. They're almost mirror images of each other, except like where the Texans are the funhouse, weird, sloppy image of the Giants, who actually do a lot of the boring stuff well. They both run the ball well, except the Giants run it better. I think Saquon Barkley and Dameon Pierce are both very, very good, and we'll get to them a little bit later. But, Saquon Barkley is more of a menace in the passing game as well. Both these teams have bad run defenses. The Giants are 25th or 26th in rushing yards allowed per game. The Texans are dead last. And the Texans are dead last by a wide margin. They have allowed 180 rushing yards per game, and the next worst run defense, the Lions, have allowed somewhere around 145 yards per game. So the Texans are that much worse than even the second worst rushing defense in the league, which is the Detroit Lions. It's really bad. So that's something that's going to be a factor today. I saw a stat earlier in the Chronicle that this year is the shortest duration on average of an NFL game in the last 3 decades. They're lasting about 3 hours and 2 minutes. And today, with these two teams that don't pass the ball all that well, Daniel Jones is on pace for maybe 3,000 yards passing, that this game might be over really quick. So if you're miserable about it and you're tired of watching the Texans, but you do it out of duty because you're a good fan, then it'll be over soon today at least. The spread is 4.5 points. It had gotten as low as 3.5 points, but Vegas does think the Texans have a fighting chance in this game. I think partly because the Texans, as bad as they are at stopping the run, they tighten up in the red zone. The pass defense tends to do a good job of not allowing passing touchdowns. And when they get into the red zone, they're actually a middle-of-the-road red zone defense. So for a team like the Giants, who are not explosive at all, they're amongst the lowest in the league at explosive plays per game. That's where the Texans have a chance. And then it all comes down to Dameon Pierce, turnovers, all that stuff. But just to kind of lay it out for you, the big difference in a lot of respects in why the Giants are 6-2 and the Texans have only won one game is because of the fourth quarter. The Texans have hung around and hung around and hung around, and they've been within one score, tied, had a lead in a bunch of games in the fourth quarter, and they just blow it. The Giants are the opposite. The Giants have played well in the fourth quarter. They are averaging 9 points a game in the fourth quarter over the last 3 games. They're 7th in the league in fourth quarter scoring, and that's where the Texans average 3 points per fourth quarter. So it's that's where they need to get better, hopefully today, if you're a Texans fan. The other big thing that, from a Giants perspective, that they're going to be concerned about today, that could be an area of opportunity for the Texans. Xavier McKinney he's out because he injured his wrist while on holiday, as the Brits would say. I think he was in Mexico, I don't know, or the Caribbean somewhere. He's on a four-wheeler, and he broke his wrist, hand injury of some sort, but he's out. Okay, why is that relevant? Obviously losing a good player and a team captain is always a big deal, but the Giants blitz way more than anybody else the Texans have faced. So that's something that the Giants do well, and that's something that at times Davis Mills has struggled with. He's gotten a lot better versus the blitz this year, but he's still a young quarterback in some regards, and that's something that might be an opportunity. If Davis Mills can take advantage of McKinney's absence, then maybe they get some more chunk yards. Maybe it's less moribund of an offense today. The other thing that the Giants would hope for in this passing offense that the Giants have really struggled to get going. I mean, Saquon Barkley is awesome as a receiving back, but he's their leading receiver in terms of number of receptions. That's not great. Kenny Golladay signed a 4-year, $72 million contract in the offseason to play receiver for the Giants. He has 2 receptions for 22 yards. So not the production that they were looking to get. By the way, my background is the restaurant from Seinfeld. For the kids, that was a TV show based in Manhattan. The Giants, of course, play in New Jersey. They're called the New York Giants. It's the whole thing. But that's what that is. So the Kenny Golladay, 4 years, $72 million, 2 receptions for 22 yards. It hasn't been because he's just been an awful receiver. He's been injured. He's only played 3 games. So if they get him back today, that should make a difference. The other concern for them, if I were to lay out some of the big concerns for the Giants, would be Evan Neal, the right tackle. He's out for the second week. His backup, Tyree Phillips, played last week. One good thing that the Texans have going for them is that Jerry Hughes, he's on pace for 15 sacks, which depresses me a little bit. But this is J.J. Watt is the only Texan player who's ever had 15 sacks or more in a season. So we know about the on-pace stuff and how fraught with peril that is. We've seen Whitney Merciless jump out to huge starts in terms of on-pace. But for whatever it's worth, Jerry Hughes last week had 2 sacks. Really should have had 3. He had Jalen Hurts he's got some strong hands. A lot of you weren't watching this game because the Astros were entwined in a World Series, which is understandably a little bit more compelling than the Texans right now. But Jerry Hughes had Jalen Hurts dead to rights, had a really good swipe at the ball, and then Jalen Hurts just has strong hands. Managed to hold on to the ball, and Jerry Hughes, I think that was the sack he missed. He could have had 3 sacks last week. He's really the one good thing the Texans have going in the front 7 right now. I think that there are signs of hope. Malik Collins comes back this week, so at least in terms of getting a pass rush up the middle, that should help. He can also play the run on the way to the quarterback and make some plays. But where the Giants do really well with Saquon Barkley is on the outside runs. So it's nice to have Malik Collins back, but the outside runs are where Saquon Barkley is one of the top guys in the league in terms of rushing yards over expected to the outside. So no matter how the blocking is laid out, Saquon Barkley gets even more out of it because he has a burst to him. And a lot of the things that you were hoping to get out of Saquon Barkley that have kind of come in fits and starts over the years, it looks like this year he's genuinely coming into his own. And I actually went back and watched some of his old college reels and some of the scouting reports coming out of him about him at college. And if you remember in college, there were times where it was kind of all or nothing, where if he had good blocking and he had a clear path, he was taking it to the house. But if it was a muddied picture at all, he would kind of sometimes he would like stop and not even hit the hole, try to back out like he was a quarterback or something. So he was really great or really ugly in college. He's figured that out, and now you'll see a lot of examples where he doesn't necessarily have pristine blocking, but he hits the hole or where the hole should be really hard, keeps his legs churning. So he is a running back in full. Different style than Dameon Pierce, but these two guys today should have some really, really good rushes. Unfortunately, there's nothing about the Texans' defense right now systemically where I feel like, hey, they're just a step away or something. The defensive line is just too undersized. I think the linebackers are a combination of not good enough and or too young. Like Christian Harris, I think, has done some really good things in the last few weeks, but there's other times where he just looks like a rookie, and he's getting his legs underneath him. I think he'll be better by the end of the season, but it's going to be a work in progress. I like his potential so far, but the front seven has just struggled. Jerry Hughes, like I said, is one of the bright spots, and then you're just hoping that some of these younger guys come along. So if we were to talk about what the Texans are worried about, rush defense today is first and foremost what I'm worried about. I think Kenny Golladay will make a difference. I don't think he's going to turn Daniel Jones all of a sudden into an all-pro receiver or anything. But I would hope that they can at least limit the passing game enough and basically encouraging the Giants to run and run and run, like we've seen multiple times in the last few games. I don't want it to be like the Titans, where the Titans were so effective in the second half that they only passed the ball one time. But I think that is where the Texans have their best chance. Brandon Cooks, the emo Brandon Cooks, and everything that comes with a Brandon Cooks. For those of you who are kind of checked out on the situation because you were absorbed to the World Series, as you should have been, Brandon Cooks wanted to get traded. The Texans tried to trade him. They were unable to, partly because he's guaranteed a boatload of money last year. They redid his deal in the offseason. He's guaranteed $18 million next year. So the Texans couldn't find a suitor that they liked. Perhaps, I don't know if Brandon Cooks maybe, put the kibosh on any potential trade partners. Who knows? But he was so upset, so besides himself with frustration that for whatever reason, he no-showed at practice. And then Lovie Smith, I think very diplomatically, said the reason he didn't play last week was because Brandon Cooks hadn't practiced. But he showed up on Thursday this week, said that he didn't know. When asked what Nick Caserio's culture for the team was, he claimed that he didn't know what the culture was after basically speaking very effusively and with very high praise about Caserio's culture back in August. So there's something amiss there, and I'm done with it. And at the same time, I hope he plays and plays well. Sometimes guys who are playing angry play really, really well. I think he's going to probably just keep to himself and keep his mouth shut. He's not going to be a captain anymore. God help me if he walks out on that field with the captain's logo on his shirt. But that's been reported that he's not a captain anymore. And it's just an ugly situation on this team that I thought was past some of the real ugliness with the departure of Jack Easterby, but I think this is kind of entwined with a lot of the Jack Easterby drama. Kamu Grugier-Hill 2 weeks ago, who was one of Jack Easterby's favorites, just asked to be released. Just quit. He just quit. Brandon Cooks just no-showed. These two big Jack Easterby guys they're not happy anymore, so they just quit. It's tenacity for you right there in the face of adversity. The adversity of making so much money next year, being mad at the Texans because they're paying you too much for the Texans to trade you. So good luck with that in the rest of your life. Today and for the rest of the week or rest of the year, I hope Brandon Cooks goes out and produces, because I'd like to see this offense get something going. The blitz is the other big concern of the Texans. So Davis Mills, in some regards, has been good or at least mediocre versus the blitz this year. Some of that is, I think, because versus other times in other aspects of the game, he's dinking and dunking a whole lot. It's funny. If you look at pass plays of 20 yards or more, pass attempts of 20 yards or more, he's actually pretty high up there. He's tied for 4th or 5th in the league with number of 20-plus yard attempts. But then when it comes to 10-plus yard attempts, he's really, really low, which doesn't seem like it should make much sense. But it's because they've kind of neglected those intermediate routes, which is really where your bread and butter is in the NFL. If you want to move the ball efficiently, you want to take some big chunk plays, you want to dink and dunk a little bit, but those intermediate range throws are where you really make your money, and he's not doing that right now. Whether it's Pep Hamilton's fault, whether it's the lack of star power at tight end or elsewhere, I don't know. It just doesn't look good, and that's obviously the big question. Bryce Young is I think Bryce Young was trending last night on my Twitter timeline, which is optimized, of course, for Texans news. So we know where a lot of people's heads are at with that. So today, I think you're going to get great rushing performances out of both Saquon Barkley and Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce, who all of a sudden over the last couple of weeks, really since the Jacksonville game, the emotion that I see him get hit with the most often is the angriest running back in the NFL because he has so many angry runs. And it's just weird because he's not an angry person at all. And I love guys like Dameon Pierce because you play with guys like this who are just they're completely different people on the football field than they are off the football field. Mark Bruner was like this for the Texans and the Steelers back in the day. I remember playing against Mark Bruner when he played for the Steelers and watching him on film. You'd think like, oh, this guy must be getting in like 3 barroom brawls a night up in Pittsburgh. This is like the badassest dude I've ever seen. And then he came to play for the Texans, and you meet Mark Bruner, and he's like a beefed up Ned Flanders, who, as you'll recall, is already beefed up himself. Bruner even studlier than Ned Flanders, but like super nice guy, very, very into family, service, faith, all that stuff. You just couldn't be more interested in your family and all these things. And I think Dameon Pierce is slightly different personality, but very positive all the time off the field, but very angry on the field. I don't know what Saquon Barkley's emotion is when he runs. I guess it's not cavalier. It's mercurial because he's still a little bit hot and cold. So sometimes he'll just take off and fly. Angry is pretty much the only emotion they ever ascribe to running backs, which is kind of messed up. They're much more nuanced and multifaceted than that. Davis Mills is the same guy he was last year. And I think he's made some flash plays. In the last few weeks, he's threaded the needle on some things. In terms of consistency and touch, I'm just not seeing it from him. And I'm all about going on and moving on and getting the next quarterback if the right guy is there where the Texans are picking. Right now, they are by far favored to have the number 1 overall pick in the draft, at least according to the nerds and computer models that I follow. So I think you can hope for some good Texans performances here and still feel good about like, okay, you know what, but they'll still also have a high pick in the draft plus the extra draft pick from Cleveland here. So feel free to root for Dameon Pierce and everybody else all you want. Cheer for a win because I think they still will end up number 1 overall, just regardless of what happens over the rest of the season. And enjoy today. Honestly, I think the Texans have a shot in this game. I think that Dameon Pierce is going to be a big, big factor. The fact that the Giants blitz a lot and that the Texans and Davis Mills, I think sometimes they've shown some progress in checking into the right run versus the blitz. If Davis Mills is on his P's and Q's and takes the extra 3 days he had because of the Thursday night game to really figure out what's going on pre-snap, he's got a really good shot at springing Dameon Pierce on some long runs versus the blitz. When you blitz, you got 7 or 8 guys right up near the line of scrimmage or deep in the backfield. If you hit it right, all your second level and third level defense gets a little bit weakened. So I'm hoping for a big, big day out of Dameon Pierce today. A couple turnovers. I'm not picking the Texans to win, but I'm expecting them to keep it close. My prediction for this game is 21-17 Giants. Everybody have a great day.